There is a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical labor or lack of sleep. It's a bone-deep weariness that seeps into the quiet moments, the moments when you're alone with nothing to distract you. It's the exhaustion of a life lived in constant resistance. Imagine standing in a river, trying to push the water back with your bare hands. The more you push, the more the water rushes around you, finding new paths, wearing you down. You become obsessed with the fight, convinced that if you just push harder, you'll eventually tame the current. But you never do. You only grow more tired, more frustrated, more convinced that you are failing at something fundamental. This is the state in which millions of people live their entire lives. They wake up every morning and begin pushing against the current of their own existence. They try to force relationships to conform to their expectations. They try to hammer their careers into the shape they planned years ago. They try to control their emotions, their thoughts, and their futures with the sheer force of their will. And then they wonder why they feel so empty, so drained, so utterly disconnected from the very life they're working so hard to build. Modern culture worships at the altar of control. We are taught from childhood that we are the masters of our fate, the captains of our souls. We are told that with enough discipline, enough determination, and enough effort, we can achieve anything. And on the surface, this sounds empowering. It sounds like freedom. But in practice, it becomes a prison. Because life, in its infinite complexity, refuses to be mastered. It refuses to be controlled. It flows according to its own rhythms, its own seasons, its own mysterious logic. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, spent his life studying the hidden architecture of the human psyche. He recognized that beneath our conscious mind, beneath all our plans and ambitions, there exists a deeper layer of the soul, a layer that speaks not in the language of logic and willpower, but in the language of dreams, intuitions, symbols, and synchronicities. He called this the unconscious, but he didn't see it as a mere storage closet for repressed memories. He saw it as a living, breathing intelligence, a source of profound wisdom that the ego, with its constant need for control, can barely perceive. When we try to force life according to our own limited plans, we are often moving against this deeper current. We are ignoring the wisdom of the soul in favor of the demands of the ego. And when that happens, life doesn't argue with us. It doesn't try to convince us we're wrong. It simply begins to withdraw its energy. It slows down. It becomes heavy. Plans that once seemed promising begin to crumble. Relationships that once felt alive become sources of tension. And we, in our confusion, usually respond by trying even harder. We double down on the very behavior that caused the problem in the first place. What if there's another way? What if the moments when life seems to resist us are not failures, but interventions? What if the exhaustion you feel is not a sign that you're not trying hard enough, but a signal that you're trying in the wrong direction? This is not a comfortable question. It challenges everything we've been taught about success, about effort, about the nature of reality itself. But it is a question that, if you sit with it long enough, has the power to transform your entire existence. In this video, we're going to explore a radical proposition. The proposition that the wisest thing you can do in certain moments of your life is absolutely nothing. Not the nothing of laziness or avoidance, but the nothing of deep listening, the nothing of surrender. We'll explore why the ego is so terrified of stillness, how the soul communicates when we refuse to listen, and what happens when we finally stop forcing and allow a deeper intelligence to guide our lives. By the time we're finished, you may never look at your struggles, your failures, or your moments of confusion the same way again. Section 1. The ego's great deception: why we mistake motion for progress. Let's begin by understanding the enemy. Not an enemy outside of you, but a part of your own mind that has perhaps hijacked your life. I'm talking about the ego. In Jungian psychology, the ego is not a bad thing. It's necessary. It's the center of your consciousness, the part of you that navigates daily life, makes decisions, and maintains a coherent sense of identity. The problem arises when the ego forgets its place, when it begins to believe that it is the entirety of who you are, and that its limited perspective is the only truth. The ego's primary function is survival, and in the ancient world, survival depended on control. Controlling your environment, controlling your resources, controlling the threats around you. This instinct is hardwired into us. But in the modern world, this instinct has become maladaptive. We no longer face saber-toothed tigers. We face uncertainty, meaninglessness, and the vast, terrifying freedom of choice. And the ego, not knowing what else to do, tries to control these things the same way it would control a physical threat. It tries to grab hold of them, to force them into submission. This is why, when a relationship feels unstable, our first impulse is often to grip tighter. We demand explanations. We seek reassurance. We try to control the other person's feelings and behaviors. We think, if I can just make them understand, if I can just say the right thing, if I can just try harder, then everything will be okay. But relationships, like all living things, cannot be controlled. They can only be nurtured, and nurturing requires trust, patience, and a willingness to let things unfold in their own time. When we grip too tightly, we don't strengthen the relationship. We suffocate it. The same pattern plays out in our careers. When we feel stuck, when our path becomes unclear, the ego screams, do something, anything. Apply for new jobs, start a side hustle, learn a new skill, and we comply. We fill our schedules with activity, hoping that the sheer volume of our effort will eventually carve a path through the fog. But often, we're just running in circles. We're like a person lost in the desert, who out of panic, starts running in random directions, exhausting themselves and using up their precious water, when what they really need to do is stop, find shade, and wait for guidance. Think about your own life for a moment. When was the last time you made a major decision not because it felt right, but because you couldn't stand the discomfort of not knowing? When was the last time you chose action over stillness, simply because action made you feel like you were in control, even if you had no idea where you were going? Jung understood this dynamic with remarkable clarity. He once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls." This is not a judgment. It's an observation. Facing your own soul means sitting in silence with your fears, your doubts, your unfulfilled longings. It means admitting that you don't have all the answers. It means acknowledging that the path you're on might be wrong. And for the ego, this is terrifying. It would rather engage in the most absurd, frantic activity than sit quietly with that kind of vulnerability. I once worked with a woman named Margaret. She was in her late 40s, successful by any external measure. She ran her own consulting firm, had a beautiful home, and was respected in her community. But she came to me because she felt like she was dying inside. She described her life as a series of tasks, one after another, with no meaning, no joy, no sense of purpose. She said, "I wake up every morning, and my mind immediately starts listing everything I have to do. I don't even have time to feel. I just do." Margaret's story is the story of our age. We have become so addicted to doing that we've forgotten how to be. We treat our lives as problems to be solved, projects to be managed, machines to be optimized. But the human soul is not a machine. It's a garden. And you cannot force a garden to bloom by running a tighter schedule. You can only prepare the soil, plant the seeds, and trust the mysterious process of growth. The ego, in its arrogance, thinks it can replace the sun and the rain with sheer willpower. But it can't. It never could. Here's the deeper truth that Margaret eventually discovered. Her frantic activity was not actually about achieving anything. It was a shield. It was a way of protecting herself from the terrifying silence where her unexamined life lived. She was afraid that if she stopped, if she sat still for even an hour, she would be forced to confront the emptiness she felt. And that confrontation felt more frightening than any amount of exhaustion. So she kept running. She kept doing. She kept the wheel spinning, even though she was going nowhere. What are you running from? What silence are you filling with noise? What question are you avoiding by staying busy? Section 2. When the river runs dry, understanding the soul's withdrawal of energy. So what happens when we persist in this pattern? What happens when we refuse to listen to the soul's whispers and continue forcing our will upon life? The answer is both simple and devastating. The energy stops flowing. This is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human life. We call it burnout. We call it depression. We call it a midlife crisis. But from a Jungian perspective, it's something else entirely. It's the soul's way of protecting us from ourselves. It's a withdrawal of libido, of life force, from a path that is leading nowhere. Think of it like this. Imagine you're driving a car, and up ahead, the road is washed out. There's a cliff, and beyond the cliff, empty air. If your car had unlimited fuel and you kept your foot on the accelerator, you would drive right off that cliff. You would be destroyed. But if, just before the cliff, your car began to sputter and lose power, if the engine started to fail and the wheels slowed down, you might be forced to stop. And in stopping, you might see the cliff. You might realize that you are headed for disaster. This is what the soul does. When you're headed for a cliff, when you're pursuing a goal or a relationship or a lifestyle that is fundamentally wrong for you, the soul doesn't cheer you on. It doesn't give you more energy to reach the cliff faster. It begins to withdraw its support. You lose interest. You feel tired. The things that once excited you now feel like chores. And most people, when they feel this, make a fatal mistake. They interpret the loss of energy as a personal failing. They think, I'm not trying hard enough. And so they push harder. They force themselves to care. They manufacture enthusiasm. They pour more and more energy into something that is already dead. I remember a story a man named Thomas shared with me. He was a musician, classically trained, and he had spent his entire life pursuing a career as a concert pianist. He practiced 6 hours a day. He sacrificed relationships, travel, and simple pleasures for his art. And then, in his early 30s, something shifted. He sat down at the piano one morning, and for the first time in his life, he felt nothing. No passion, no drive, just a hollow emptiness. He was terrified. He thought he had lost his gift, his identity, his reason for being. For 2 years, Thomas tried to fight it. He forced himself to practice. He took on students to stay connected to music. He saw therapists who tried to help him get his passion back. But nothing worked. The more he pushed, the more hollow he felt. Finally, in a moment of despair, he stopped. He stopped playing altogether. He stopped forcing. He just sat in the silence and waited. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. After months of doing nothing, he found himself drawn, not to the piano, but to an old guitar his grandfather had left him. He picked it up tentatively, without any agenda, without any expectation. And for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of joy. Not the intense, driven passion of his youth, but a quiet, gentle pleasure. He started writing songs, not for an audience, not for a career, but simply because he enjoyed it. He began playing in small cafes, not for money, but for the pure joy of sharing music. Thomas's story illustrates a profound truth. The energy he lost wasn't gone forever. It was simply withdrawn from a path that had become rigid, performative, and disconnected from his soul. When he stopped forcing, when he let go of his identity as a concert pianist, the energy was free to flow again, but in a new direction. A direction that was more authentic, more alive, more truly his. The natural world operates in cycles. There is a time for growth and a time for dormancy. A time for activity and a time for rest. The farmer understands this. He doesn't expect his fields to produce in winter. He doesn't curse the snow for covering his crops. He knows that the fallow period is necessary. It's a time for the soil to regenerate, to gather nutrients, to prepare for the next season of growth. Why do we expect our lives to be different? Why do we demand that our souls produce fruit every single day, without rest, without fallow periods, without the deep silence of winter? When the energy stops flowing, when you feel that familiar numbness or exhaustion, ask yourself, am I in winter? Is my soul asking me to rest, to go inward, to wait, or am I trying to force spring in the middle of December? Section 3. The language of symptoms: how the unconscious demands to be heard. If the withdrawal of energy is the first signal, the first gentle tap on the shoulder, what happens when we ignore it? What happens when we push through the exhaustion? When we numb the anxiety? When we refuse to acknowledge the winter? The signals get louder. They become impossible to ignore. Jung had a revolutionary perspective on psychological symptoms. Unlike the mainstream medicine of his time, which saw symptoms as problems to be eliminated, Jung saw them as messages. He believed that depression, anxiety, compulsions, and even physical illness could be the psyche's way of communicating something that the conscious mind was refusing to hear. He wrote, "The gods have become diseases." What a remarkable statement. He meant that the powerful forces of the unconscious, the archetypal energies that once were personified as gods and goddesses, now manifest in modern people as psychological and physical symptoms. Think about anxiety. From a Jungian perspective, anxiety is not just a chemical imbalance. It's a signal that something in your life is out of alignment. It's the soul's alarm system, warning you that you're moving toward danger or away from your truth. When you feel that knot in your stomach, that racing heart, that sense of impending doom, your first instinct is usually to make it go away. You take a pill, you distract yourself, you pour a drink. But what if, instead of silencing the alarm, you stopped to ask what it was trying to tell you? I received a letter once from a viewer named Patricia. She was a teacher, dedicated to her students, beloved by her colleagues. But for years, she suffered from debilitating migraines. She saw specialists, tried medications, altered her diet. Nothing worked. The migraines continued, sometimes forcing her to miss weeks of work. In her letter, she described a turning point. During a particularly severe migraine, lying in a dark room with nothing to do but think, she had a sudden realization. The migraines always came on Sunday nights. Always. And they were always worse during the school year and disappeared during summer break. She began to ask herself a different question. Not how do I stop these migraines, but what are these migraines trying to tell me? The answer, when it came, was devastatingly simple. Her body was telling her that she hated her job. Not the teaching itself, but the environment. The politics, the pressure, the endless administrative tasks that had nothing to do with helping children learn. Her soul had been screaming this at her for years, but she had refused to listen because leaving her job felt impossible. It was secure. It was respected. It was what she should do. Patricia's migraines were not her enemy. They were her ally. They were the only voice her soul had left to communicate with. When she finally listened, when she finally admitted the truth she had been hiding from herself, she was able to make a change. She left teaching and started a small tutoring business, working one-on-one with students in a way that felt meaningful. The migraines didn't disappear overnight, but they lost their power. They had delivered their message, and they no longer needed to scream. This is a difficult teaching. It's much easier to believe that our problems are random, biological, or external. It's much harder to accept that they might be meaningful, that our suffering might be trying to tell us something about ourselves that we don't want to know. But this is the path of depth psychology. This is the path of the soul. What symptom in your life have you been trying to eliminate without ever asking what it's trying to say? What is your anxiety, your fatigue, your unexplained sadness, whispering to you in the quiet moments you're too afraid to have? Jung also spoke about dreams as a primary channel of communication from the unconscious. He believed that dreams are not random neural firings, but meaningful messages from a deeper part of ourselves. They are the soul speaking in its native language of symbol and metaphor. If you're ignoring a major truth in your waking life, your dreams will often show it to you. A dream of being chased might mean you're running from something in yourself. A dream of your teeth falling out might symbolize a loss of power or a fear of aging. A dream of a crumbling house might represent the collapse of your current psychological structure. The point is not to become an expert dream interpreter. The point is to start paying attention, to start treating your inner life with the respect it deserves. When you have a powerful dream, write it down. Sit with it. Ask it what it wants you to know. When you feel a symptom arising in your body, don't immediately reach for the medicine cabinet. Breathe into it. Ask it what it's trying to tell you. You might be surprised by the answers that come. Section 4. The necessary unraveling when everything falls apart. There comes a point in many lives when the whispers and the symptoms are no longer enough. When the slow withdrawal of energy and the gentle nudges of the unconscious have been ignored for too long. At this point, life itself may intervene in a more dramatic fashion. The structure you've built, the identity you've clung to, the plans you've cherished, begin to crumble. We call this catastrophe. We call it failure. We call it the worst thing that could happen. And it certainly feels that way. When a marriage ends, when a career collapses, when a belief system shatters, it feels like death. And in a very real sense, it is. It is the death of a version of yourself, the death of a story you've been telling. And death, even when necessary, is always painful. But Jung, with his characteristic depth, invites us to see these moments differently. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." This is not a statement of pessimism. It's a statement of reality. Growth, real growth, the kind that transforms your very being, is not comfortable. It cannot happen within the safe, familiar structures of the ego. Those structures have to be broken. The chrysalis has to be torn open for the butterfly to emerge. Consider the symbol of the phoenix. It's an ancient image found in many cultures. The phoenix is a magnificent bird that lives for hundreds of years. But at the end of its life cycle, it doesn't simply die of old age. It builds a nest of aromatic wood and sets it on fire. It allows itself to be consumed by the flames. And from the ashes of its old body, a new phoenix arises, reborn and renewed. This is not a story about destruction. It's a story about transformation. It's a recognition that certain kinds of renewal require complete dissolution of the old form. In modern science, we see this principle at work as well. In neuroscience, when we learn something truly new, when we undergo a paradigm shift in our thinking, our brains literally rewire themselves. Old neural pathways weaken and die. New ones form and strengthen. This process, called neuroplasticity, is the physical basis of growth, and it requires a kind of dying. The old you, the you that thought in certain patterns and believed certain things, must give way to a new you. I think of a man named Richard, a client I worked with years ago. Richard was an engineer, a man of logic and precision. He had built his entire identity around being rational, competent, and in control. Then his company downsized, and he lost his job. For the first time in his adult life, he had no structure, No title, no clear role. He fell into a deep depression. He stopped leaving the house. He stopped talking to friends. His wife was terrified. He was terrified. In our sessions, Richard kept trying to fix himself. He wanted strategies, plans, action steps. He wanted to rebuild his identity as quickly as possible. But I encouraged him to do something counterintuitive. I encouraged him to stay in the ashes, to not rebuild immediately, to sit with the pain, the confusion, the not knowing. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He felt like he was dying. But slowly, over months, something began to shift. In the silence, in the emptiness, he started to hear a voice he had never heard before. A voice that wasn't interested in engineering, in logic, in being competent. A voice that wanted to paint, to write poetry, to spend hours in nature. This voice had been buried for decades under layers of shoulds and expectations. It had only been able to emerge when the structure of his old identity had completely collapsed. Richard's story forces us to ask a difficult question. What if the thing you fear most, the loss, the failure, the collapse, is actually the only thing that can save you? What if the life you're so desperately trying to hold on to is the very thing that's keeping you from the life you're meant to live? This is the paradox at the heart of spiritual and psychological growth. The ego clings to what is familiar, even when it's killing us. The soul, with a wisdom far beyond the ego's understanding, sometimes has to dismantle what we cling to in order to set us free. The collapse, seen through this lens, is not a punishment. It's an act of mercy. It's the universe saying, you cannot go on like this. It's time for something new. Section 5. The world begins to speak synchronicity as guidance. After the collapse, when the ashes have cooled and you're no longer desperately trying to rebuild the old structure, something strange and wonderful often begins to happen. The world starts to speak to you in a new language. Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity to describe this phenomenon. He defined it as a meaningful coincidence. It's when an inner event, thought, a feeling, a dream, coincides with an outer event in a way that is not causally connected, but is deeply meaningful to the person experiencing it. You're thinking about an old friend you haven't spoken to in years, and at that exact moment they call you. You're struggling with a difficult decision, and you open a book to a random page that contains the exact advice you needed. You decide to let go of a resentment, and that afternoon, you encounter the person who wronged you and have a chance to heal. From a purely materialistic perspective, these are just coincidences, random events with no significance. But from a Jungian perspective, and from the perspective of virtually every spiritual tradition, they are signposts. They are moments when the universe, or God, or the deep self, reaches out to remind you that you are not alone, that you are part of a larger, interconnected whole. I experienced a powerful synchronicity myself many years ago. I was at a crossroads in my life, unsure whether to pursue a traditional career path or to follow a much riskier path of writing and teaching. I was paralyzed by indecision. One afternoon, walking through a park, feeling utterly lost, I sat down on a bench. On the other end of the bench was an old man reading a newspaper. After a few minutes, he folded the newspaper and looked at me. He said, completely out of nowhere, "You know, the best decisions are the ones that scare you half to death." Then he smiled, stood up, and walked away. I never saw him again. Was this a coincidence? A random stranger offering unsolicited advice? Of course. But the timing, the content, the feeling behind his words, it struck me with the force of a revelation. It was exactly what I needed to hear at exactly the moment I needed to hear it. To dismiss it as just a coincidence felt like a kind of blindness. It felt like refusing to see a message that was being handed to me. Jung believed that synchronicities become more frequent and more noticeable when a person is going through a period of psychological transformation. When the ego's grip loosens and you become more open to the unconscious, you also become more open to these meaningful connections with the outer world. It's as if the boundary between inner and outer becomes more permeable. The world begins to reflect your inner state. Think back over your own life. Have there been moments of coincidence that felt too meaningful to be random? A chance meeting that changed your direction? A book that fell into your hands at exactly the right time? A song that played at the exact moment you needed to hear its message? The key to synchronicity is not to try to force it or manufacture it. You cannot meditate for 3 hours and demand a sign. Synchronicity is a gift, not a technique. It arises naturally when you are in a state of openness and trust. When you have stopped forcing, stopped clinging, stopped trying to control every outcome. In that state of receptive surrender, the world can finally get a word in edgewise. Think of it like this. For most of your life, you've been shouting your plans at the universe. You've been so busy talking, so busy demanding, so busy asserting your will, that you couldn't hear anything else. The collapse silences you. It takes away your voice, your plans, your demands. And in that silence, for the first time, you can hear the universe whispering back. And that whispering often comes in the form of perfectly timed coincidences that guide you, gently, toward your next step. These synchronicities are not a detailed map. They won't show you the next 5 years of your life. They are more like small lights in the fog, illuminating just enough of the path for you to take the next step. And then, when you take that step, another light appears. This is how guidance works when you're living in alignment. Not through grand, unambiguous revelations, but through a series of small, meaningful nudges that over time lead you exactly where you need to go. Section 6. The deepest peace, knowing you're on the right path. We've traveled a long road together, from the exhausting compulsion to control, through the withdrawal of energy, the crisis of symptoms, the collapse of old structures, and the emergence of synchronicities. But there is one final sign, the deepest and most reliable sign of all, that you are finally where you need to be. It is not success. It is not happiness, in the shallow, fleeting sense of the word. It is a deep, abiding sense of peace. Think back to the feeling of forcing. Remember the tension in your shoulders, the knot in your stomach, the constant mental chatter. Remember the way it felt to swim against the current, to push against the river, to fight your own life at every turn. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine moving through your day not because you have to, but because each step feels like a natural expression of who you are. Imagine facing challenges not with dread, but with a quiet confidence that you can handle whatever comes. Imagine lying in bed at night, not replaying the day's anxieties, but feeling a gentle sense of gratitude for simply being alive. This is what alignment feels like. This is what it means to be on the path of your own becoming. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. And he understood that this journey doesn't lead to a life without problems. It leads to a life where the fundamental relationship between you and your existence has been healed. The war is over. You are no longer fighting yourself. I think of a woman I met named Clara. Clara had spent 20 years in a high-powered corporate job. She was brilliant, successful, and deeply miserable. She had done all the things we're supposed to do, climbed the ladder, made the money, earned the respect. But inside, she felt like she was dying. Finally, after a health scare, she walked away. She sold her house, moved to a small coastal town, and opened a tiny bookstore. When I visited her, I expected to hear a story of blissful fulfillment. Instead, she told me the truth. I make a fraction of what I used to. I worry about money constantly. Some days, no one comes into the store at all. It's not easier. It's not more comfortable, but it's mine." She paused, and then she said something I've never forgotten. "When I wake up in the morning, I don't want to hide under the covers anymore. I want to get up and see what the day brings." That's the difference. I'm not happy all the time, but I'm present. I'm alive. I'm at peace. This is the ultimate sign. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of peace. Not the elimination of fear, but the ability to feel fear without being paralyzed by it. Not a life of constant pleasure, but a life where even the pain feels meaningful. Because it's your pain, arising from your path, faced with your own strength. Where in your life do you feel that peace? Not excitement, not comfort, but a quiet, steady sense of rightness. And where do you feel that constant, draining tension, that feeling of pushing against a closed door, of swimming against a current too strong for you? The soul speaks in the language of feeling. The ego speaks in the language of fear and ambition. The ego tells you to pursue what looks good, what earns approval, what matches the plan. The soul tells you to pursue what feels alive, what brings peace, what resonates with the deepest part of you. Learning to distinguish between these two voices is the great work of a lifetime. When you're on the wrong path, you'll know it by the exhaustion, the resentment, the constant sense of struggle. You'll feel like you're dragging a weight behind you everywhere you go. But when you're on the right path, even the hard days feel different. You're tired, but it's a clean tired. The tired of honest work, not the toxic exhaustion of self-betrayal. You're challenged, but the challenges feel like invitations to grow, not punishments for being wrong. This peace is not something you can force. It's not something you can achieve by trying harder. It's something that arises naturally when you stop trying to be someone else and start allowing yourself to be who you are. It's the reward for the long, difficult journey of letting go. It's the quiet confirmation that, after all the wandering and all the pain, you have finally found your way home. Conclusion. We began with the image of a person trying to hold back the ocean with their bare hands. We've traced the arc of that struggle, from the frantic activity of the ego, through the withdrawal of energy, the escalation of symptoms, the shattering collapse, the mysterious guidance of synchronicity, and finally, the arrival of deep peace. The invitation of this video is simple, though not easy. It is an invitation to stop forcing, to stop treating your life as a problem to be solved, and start experiencing it as a mystery to be lived. It is an invitation to trust that there is a wisdom deeper than your plans, a current stronger than your will, a guidance more reliable than your fears. When you stop forcing, you don't become passive. You become receptive. You stop swimming against the current and start letting it carry you. You stop demanding that life conform to your expectations and start listening to what life is trying to teach you. You stop clinging to the shore and start trusting the river. There will still be rapids. There will still be moments of fear and uncertainty. But you will meet them differently. Not as a fighter, exhausted and alone, but as a traveler, curious and open, trusting that the river knows where it's going. You will discover that the path you were so desperately trying to create has been there all along, waiting for you to stop struggling long enough to see it. And in those rare, precious moments of stillness, you may feel something you've been searching for your entire life. Not a solution to every problem, not an answer to every question, but something deeper, a sense that you are exactly where you need to be, that you are held, that you are guided, that you are, at last, at home. If this journey has resonated with you, if it's sparked something in your own soul, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're willing, share your own story in the comments. Have you experienced a collapse that became a beginning? A synchronicity that guided you? A moment of peace that told you you were on the right path? Your story might be the very light someone else needs to find their way. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next video.